Hello everyone and welcome to the webinar Adventures in Crowdsourcing, Validating Crowdsourcing Data. My name is Nilu Parvanashtiani and I'll be helping with facilitating today's webinar. This webinar is sponsored by the Federal Highway Administration and is hosted by the National Operations Center of Excellence or NOCO. So just a quick reminder, if you don't know NOCO already, we are in the mission of providing transportation system management and operations resources to the TISMO community. So on your screen right now, on the bottom left side, you can see a pod called Useful Links box, and there are several TISMO resources through NOCO website are shared there. We also have several EDC5 crowdsourcing web pages listed there as additional resources that are listed for this webinar. And on the right side of that useful links, you see a download slides pod where you can download supporting material as well as a PDF of today's presentations. These pods will be shown here at the intro, and then once we're done with the presentations, we'll come back to these pods during Q&A, so you'll have an opportunity to download the slides also then. So a few logistics for today's webinar. We are recording the webinar, and that recording, along with the presentation slides, will be shared on the on-demand learning section of NOCO's website. All the attendee phones are on listen-only mode, but we ask you to stay engaged throughout the webinar by sharing your comments and questions in the question discussion pod that you see on the screen right now. So as questions come to your mind, just type them in there. And at the end, we do have dedicated time for Q&A, so our moderator will be reading the questions out loud one at a time and pose them to our presenters. So that is all I had, and with that, I'll hand it over to our moderator, James Collier, to start us off. James?
All right. Thanks, Nilo. Thanks to the Center of Excellence for assisting with this webinar and for putting on your platform. Thanks again. So my name is James Collier, Federal Highway Administration, Office of Operations, and I'm co-lead for the Everyday Counts Round 5 Crowdsourcing for Operations program. This is the 8th installment of this webinar series, Adventures in Crowdsourcing. So and we've got a couple more we'll tell you about coming up as well. Today moderating with me will be Vaishali Shah, who's our crowdsourcing support contractor. So Everyday Counts, or EDC, is on round 5, and crowdsourcing for operations is one of the innovations. And our goal really is to increase the number of agencies that use crowdsourcing. Not just use it, but in a way that it helps them better operate their transportation system through new or cost-effective and proactive operational strategies and applications. So we've been working on EDC5 now for about a year and a half, and approximately 30 states are working with us and teaming with us on advancing crowdsourcing for operations. One of the ways that the EDC program tracks progress is through a 5-stage capability maturity model, with the stages that you see at the bottom of the slide there, all the way from not implementing up to institutionalize. And today we've assisted 19 states in advancing one or more levels in their use of crowdsourced data. So we've been making a lot of great progress. As you see here, what we've noticed in working with about 30 states is there's a couple of common applications that seem to be most commonly used, at least when states are starting out, and those are traveler information and incident management. But we're also seeing uses expand across multiple applications areas, including in traffic signal management, work zone management, road weather management, maintenance management. The limits are endless, really, or limitless, I should say. We're seeing a lot of use in performance management and performance reporting as well. So that's kind of the beauty of crowdsourced data. There's just a lot of different ways you can use it within the realm of operations and even beyond that. So with the EDC-5 program, we have a number of resources that are available to states and local agencies and consultants and people supporting them. We have a number of virtual events, workshops, or peer exchanges that we've been hosting and will continue to do. Also more specific technical assistance to help bridge technical policy or process gaps in your state or local agency. We have a webinar series like the one we're doing today, and all of our resources are compiled on the resource site that you see the link for at the bottom of that slide. Don't have to remember. All you have to do is just Google, EDC-5 crowdsourcing, and that link should pop up. In addition, there's a couple of funding mechanisms that are available to public agencies through the EDC-5 program, the STIC incentive program and the aid demonstration program. There's links there for more information, but just wanted to let you know that there are funding opportunities to help you if funding is a barrier to advance in your crowdsourcing efforts. So to today's agenda, that's James, that's myself I just gave a quick introduction, and now I'm going to introduce the rest of our speakers here in the order that they'll be presenting. So we have Elise Morgan and Jeff Hockmuth. They're going to be co-presenting. Elise currently is the Traffic Operations Center Manager for the Illinois Tollway. She's also project manager for ITS design on the 23-mile I-294 Central Tri-State Rebuild and Widening Project. And Jeff has been practicing traffic engineering in both public and private sectors. With the public sector as the Illinois Tollway Assistant Traffic Engineer and the Illinois DOT Statewide ITS Program Manager. He's currently at CDN Smith, and he's been there for 16 years supporting traffic and ITS projects around the world and locally with the Illinois Tollway. After them will be Zach Vanderland. Zach is a Transportation Research Analyst for the Center for Advanced Transportation Technology, or CAT Lab at the University of Maryland. He manages the probe data validation programs for the I-95 Corridor Coalition and the National Performance Management Research Dataset, or NPMRDS. Following Zach is a co-presentation by Jason DeSembre and Ben Pichot. Jason is the Division Chief for TNC Operations and has been with the Maryland State Highways Administration for 15 years. And he has a background in data analysis and special operations, and he's a member of the TNC Pool Fund Study. And Ben is the Director of Information Research and the Chief Data Scientist at AEM Corporation. And Ben has guided big data and systems transformation across multiple federal agencies for over 20 years and currently supporting the Crowdsourcing for Operations Innovation. So as we go through our presentations today, just feel free to put questions as you think of them in the chat box for our presenters, and we'll either be able to answer them in the chat pod, or we'll also have a Q&A session towards the end of the webinar. We'll be able to get into more detail about your questions. So with that, let me go ahead and turn it over to Elise and Jeff.
Thank you, James. My name is Elise. I'm working with the Illinois Tollway. I want to start off by giving you a little background about the Illinois Tollway. We are situated in Northeast Illinois and are composed of 294 miles across 5 interstates and serve about 1.6 million users per day. Our Traffic Operations Center serves as a point to take in and relay information to our dispatch center, which in turn disseminates information to our maintenance units, state police, and other first responders and tow companies. Our maintenance units are empowered to respond to any lane blocking incidents, and we have our own state police district that serves the tollway. The software that we use to manage everything that we do is TIMS. TIMS is our only platform needed by the operators, that everything that we do can be done through here. Through TIMS, we have center-to-center connections to Lake County DOT and our regional traveler information site, which is Travel Midwest. There are multiple systems connected to help us manage traffic and incidents, such as our state police CAD system, our lane closure database, our iPass data, vehicle detectors, and Bluetooth for travel time and weather information stations. We send out information to our drivers from here as well to platforms such as Twitter, Waze, and emails to the media. Here's a look at then and now for collecting traffic data. In the early 60s, we started with loop point detectors that were tied back using telephone lines. At that time, we also had manual toll collection locations that we could use to determine traffic volume. Today, we are slightly more sophisticated and can take advantage of our more robust power and fiber network. We can bring data in from various sources, including point detection from microwave detectors, Bluetooth readers, and multiple crowdsourced data services, including Waze, Here, Inrix, etc. Our first version of traffic detection was through our iPass tolling readers. This graphic shows our mainline collection points with the bold green lines, as well as the entries and exits that we use to gain data for travel times. And then through a grant, we were able to purchase our first side-fire radars to provide us with point detection in urban areas. Jeff will give you more information about that. And while this information was available across most of the system, it was something something we already owned. We had a way of making sure to toss out any anomalies. It still had some drawbacks. Those included not having information past the last collection point on the system to give us data, travel time to the end of our system, and the fact that we were only able to collect at our collection points, which could sometimes be upwards of 5 miles apart. This sometimes led to data being old, and in some sections, of course, there were latencies as drivers had to pass that entire stretch of road before we got the data. So this led us to seek other options for calculating better travel times, which is one of our core services that we provide to our customers. Jeff will explain now the evolution from this point.
Sorry, off mute. Thank you, Elise. As Elise mentioned, way back at the beginning, there wasn't TOLLWAY was one of the original ITIP agreements with Traffic.com, which added a bunch of microwave sensors. Then over the years has purchased more, both using their own funds and using the agreement money with Traffic.com to fill in the gaps. And they've also started using Bluetooth data, first in construction zones and then on permanent locations, including the tri-state tollway. So they have multiple ways of collecting traffic data. So why change if this has been working really well for 15 years? Well, first of all, there's an opportunity to evaluate the cost effectiveness of the current approach. ITS in general doesn't cost a lot compared to the cost of reconstructing a road, but it is still a cost, and there are recurring costs such as maintenance too. In addition, there's a lot more, technology has a lot more options available today, not just with the crowdsourced third-party data, but even with different detection technologies. And building off of what James mentioned earlier, in the era of big data, there's a lot more users of the data than just the TIMS system. Originally, it was primarily TIMS that uses the traffic data from the sensors, but there's a lot of different groups that have performance measures or other things, reports that they're generating based on this data. and the accuracy and availability wasn't always what they wanted there for their purposes. So I apologize for the cartoonish graphics, but as we all know, the history, and this has worked very well, and a lot of systems continue to do, most systems I think continue to do this. We have point detectors. They represent a section of freeway. But what we've seen in terms of design and construction over the years, that sometimes those point detectors aren't always in the best location. 100 feet one way or the other can make a big difference when it comes to congested operations. So what we started looking at was a new detection strategy, looking at crowdsourced data, third-party data, and looking at different segmentation of that data, hopefully better than what we have with the point detectors. One of the issues that comes up with this, though, and we'll talk a little bit more about counts, even though it can be estimated using crowdsourced data, TOLLWAY likes to have direct measured counts. So you're going to have to supplement your third-party data with mainline count stations. In addition, you do have some known hotspot locations where you may want more lane-by-lane and more dense traffic volumes and speeds. And while I think the third-party data is moving in that direction, at least for the short term, there are locations where you may want to supplement the third-party data with some very direct measurement, whether it's through microwave sensors, loops, or anything else at a few locations. So the main uses for the traffic data, at least direct uses, travel time, congestion, incidents, and traffic counts. So again, on the central tri-state, we already have Bluetooth at about 1.5 mile spacing. We already have the microwave at about 0.5 mile spacing. During the test period, we have third-party data also on there. All of them provide travel times, either directly or as applied using that, taking the point detection and applying it to a section. Congestion, just the reverse of the same application, where you have the speeds and the travel time data, you can identify the congestion points, same 3 sources. For incidents, the primary sources really are the closed circuit, the CCTV cameras, and the motorist phone calls. That's by far the majority of the incidents are detected that way. There is an automatic incident detection algorithm running. Algorithm got cut off there, sorry, but there is an algorithm running in the background, and that does pick up on some incidents also. But the majority is covered through the phone calls and the cameras. And certainly for traffic counts, the toll collection points, there are multiple redundant sensors at every toll collection point that information is audited against the money collected. So we are very confident that where money is collected, we know exactly how many vehicles are passing through there. That's not shared in real time just yet, but it is a source for those performance measures that many other groups use. And the microwave sensors here do provide lane-by-lane counts at locations, so they can supplement that. And as I mentioned with the crowdsourced data, there are many vendors willing to supply count information, and they may have very highly accurate count information. As a TOLLWAY, we want our own detectors, and we want to make sure that we know exactly what we're collecting there. So we looked at we have just completed or wrapping up our third-party pilot project on the Central Tri-State, and talk about a few things. First of all, with the Central Tri-State, we are completely out of right-of-way on this project. With the widening, there is fiber and power along the entire road, but anytime you're adding more ITS infrastructure, you have pullouts for vehicles or for electrical boxes. You have to go out and maintain the equipment, and so you're exposing workers and motorists to closures. So the ability to be able to not have sensors out on this roadway is seen as a big advantage to the tollway. And that was our test, was to verify this against the current technologies too. So at the beginning of this test, we pre-selected 3 vendors, and when I say we, it was CDM Smith making recommendations to the tollway. So if anyone has a gripe, go ahead and send me your emails. But the intent here was just to purchase 12 months of data. We were limited by some budget and other restrictions. So those were the 3 sources here, NRIX and Verizon, that we selected. no guarantee of future payments. This is certainly not meant to rank the vendors. This is certainly not a pre-selection process. Assuming that the tollway will move ahead with purchasing data in the future, it's going to be an open procurement, I'm sure. So that was what we did to select the vendors. We looked at probably, I think, about a dozen different areas. We have more statistics than I ever care to look at again. But the main things that we worried about in terms of verifying that the third-party data could meet the needs of the operations, rush hour speeds, congestion, and travel times. And then we also did some pro-vehicle runs. So on the rush hour speeds, this is just a sample month here showing the vendors, and we compared them against the microwave for this one. And two key points here. One of them, this is pretty typical for the months that all the vendors had similar curves representing the data over time, but there were differences in the values of them. And one of the big assumptions we made up front was that there really is no such thing as ground truth. You put two vehicles drive the 23-mile corridor, and they may end up with different travel times. They're certainly going to experience different speeds at different points depending on what lane they're in, who they're following. So we were not concerned so much about the difference in the values. We were more concerned in seeing the consistency. Whatever source we have, the TIM staff will will get used to using it and understand how the congestion really represents what's going on the roadway. Another thing we looked at that was travel times is just congestion here. This is one of the hot spots southbound from the Cermak Toll Plaza to Ogden Avenue. And what was measured here was congestion was in terms of minutes when the speed dropped below 35 miles per hour. So again, you see a general consistency across the vendors here. Now, if you look at July, you can say, well, some of the vendors were up around over 200 minutes. The microwave, I think that's the MVDS, the microwave system was more closer to 100. Again, 35 somewhat arbitrary for us, but it's the consistency and how all of them performed that's really the key here, not the actual value of each one. Travel time comparison, we did see similar trends. The probe data had some unique issues in June. I did want to remark here, I included INRIX in here. There were some issues in December and January. Those were 100% on our side of the fence. It was not a problem with INRIX. It was a problem with us. So just note that it's in there, but again, general consistency with the sources on travel times. And we're comparing against Bluetooth. Bluetooth is the current standard that Tollway uses to display travel times on their DMS. And generally, they're all within 1 or 2 minutes of the Bluetooth. We ran scores of probe runs up and down the corridor here, and I could handpick any one of the hundreds of graphs that we have on that. I just show a couple here to show, again, similar patterns. I did want to note here that the Verizon data had an issue at the north end on this one. And on this one, there was a here issue on the south end. And again, I could have picked other graphs that showed 0 issues with all of them, or one of them spot on, one of them not. Overall, statistically, everything worked really well. We were very happy with the consistency of all the sources. And that just supplements more ground truth, or no ground truth, that regardless of the source, whether it's a crowdsourced data or whether it's directly measured from sensors, there is some variability that we're always going to see. Now to the really important stuff, cost. If you look at just travel time, we go back to just the travel time, the third-party data, the crowdsourced data can provide the travel time information and the congestion information just fine and dandy. And the 10-year life cycle costs are extremely low on that. When we look at the complete detection, so here when we talked about we need mainline counters and some hotspot detections. For our analysis, we assumed that there were 2.5 mainline counters that were added to the Central Tri-State project, and there were 4 hotspotted locations that we identified. So when you add in the point detection that's required for those sources, you still get a 10-year life cycle cost with the third-party strategy, overall strategy, that's roughly or less than half of just the the current strategy of implementing the microwave just by itself at half-mile spacing. So again, just in summary, data collection ended in February 2020. The final reports were submitted in July. There's still some follow-up questions that we're addressing, so there's still some tweaking and adjusting to that. But overall, the recommendations, the third-party crowdsourced data certainly provided sufficient accuracy availability. I did not have the slide on availability, but overall, over the 9 months that we had all three sources together, less than 1% of the time we lost data from any one of the sources. So high availability from all of the sources, and the accuracy was right where we wanted it. So the overall recommendation is to supplement the Bluetooth, which is already out there, with third-party data on the Central Tri-State. And again, that's they're considering that at the moment, and we'll be making decisions on that sometime, hopefully this fall. So there's Elise and my information if you have any questions or want to follow up with us, and thank you very much.
Thank you, Jeff and Elise. If you have any questions, please go ahead and put them in the chat pod. If they're little quick questions like, you know, how many sensors or things of that sort, we'll try to have the answer to you, and then we'll also bring up some of the Q&A afterwards. Next is Zach Vanderland from the University of Maryland CAT Center. And over to you, Zach.
All right, thank you, and good afternoon, everyone. Today I'm going to share a little bit of the research we've done recently at the Eastern Transportation Coalition regarding probe data quality on arterial facilities. To give a bit of a framework for what I'm planning to go through, I'm not quite sure everyone's background here on the call, so I'm going to start with a brief review of the Vehicle Probe Project and the associated validation program, which is something that I manage and have been involved in the last couple of years. Before I jump into the core content, sharing some of the results of the arterial analysis we did, I'm going to start by talking about what I mean by validation, kind of some of the key methods we use to evaluate probe data quality and our general perspective for doing it. Afterwards, I'll talk about the arterial case studies we conducted and how the data quality has evolved over time, and then wrap up with some final comments about where things stand now and where we're moving in the future. So the Vehicle Probe Project began back in 2008. The idea was to provide coalition members with an opportunity to acquire reliable travel time and speed data without having to go place sensors in the field. At the time, this was a pretty revolutionary idea with implications for both operations and historical planning purposes. One of the key parts of the procurement process, though, was establishing some basic standards for data quality. And at this point, the focus was on freeway facilities. So ultimately, a single vendor, INRIX, was selected to provide data in this first iteration of the project. And since it began in about 2008, 2009, this INRIX data has been subjected to regular, rigorous quantitative validation. But then in 2014, the project entered its second phase, and rather than the form of the first phase, it evolved into a probe data marketplace where two other vendors, HERE and TomTom, joined INRIX in providing these travel time and speed-based data sets, which coalition members could purchase. Another thing that happened at that point was an increased emphasis on arterial facilities, which tend to be characterized by more complex traffic conditions. And so some of the baseline standards and ideas for validation and data quality were extended to signalize roadways. So overall, over the course of about 12 years, since 2008, 2009, the coalition has conducted upwards of 70 plus discrete validations of this data, looking at it from different angles. And again, just for reference in the rest of the presentation, VPP1 indicates the first phase of the project, which was just INRIX data, and VPP2 is the current iteration of the Vehicle Probe project, which refers to travel time and speed-based data sets provided by 3 vendors, here INRIX and TomTom. So what do I mean when I say that we regularly validate the data? At a high level, we go out into the field and we place re-identification sensors, Bluetooth and Wi-Fi technology. We place these sensors in the field and use them to collect a sample of travel time observations. We use this sample to characterize the ground truth conditions, both in terms of point and interval estimates for a given time period, and then use this as the basis for evaluation and compare what we see in our sample data to what's being provided through the marketplace by the 3 vendors. The details of our analysis depend on the goals of the validation, but based on some established methodologies, we compute various error measures, summarize the results in terms of graphs to communicate the findings, and then produce regular reports. And the idea of this process is to provide customers in the marketplace with the assurance that someone's looking at the data quality, somebody's testing it to see where it works and where it doesn't, and just to provide general insight into how it can be used. But some of the things you have to consider as you're evaluating data quality include the perspective. Do you care about data quality at a point in time, perhaps for operations purposes, or do you care about repeatable patterns for historical planning purposes? Additionally, should you weight each period of time the same, or do you care more about special events? These are all things we have to think about as we look at the data. Historically, the way that validation has worked is something we refer to as the traditional validation method. Essentially, it's a point-in-time comparison between what we see in the ground truth or the re-identification data and what the vendors are reporting. And this is conducted at the 5-minute level. Based on this approach, we compute a couple of standard error measures. One of them looks at the absolute error in each time interval. Another one looks for the bias to see if there's systematic over or under reporting of speeds compared to what we're seeing. And then we report these in different ways. Sometimes we break them into different speed bins. There's other ways we slice the data as well to try to gain some insight into performance under different conditions. And one thing I want to point out is that, again, our data collection process is a sampling process, and so we do characterize the ground truth in terms of a confidence band, recognizing that there's some variability in what we're seeing in our own reference data. So this approach is what's been used most often for validation and what's generally written into the contract specifications, but it can break down at times on more complex roads. To illustrate this, I have a figure here on the right-hand side of this slide. If you notice, this picture has speed on the y-axis and time on the x-axis. And here what I'm trying to show is that there are a couple of distinct speed modes that can be observed here. This is something you tend to see on arterials where traffic flow is more complex. There's a higher variance in the speeds. There's stop and go cycles based on signal timing, and just traffic flow in general is more complex and harder to characterize with a single single average value per time period. So this makes the traditional validation not obsolete, but it means the results should be treated with a bit more caution. So this is something to keep in mind when you're looking at arterial facilities. Another approach we use for analyzing the probe data is something called the slowdown analysis. This analysis is quite simple, but it's proven to be more robust on signalized arterials. In particular, this approach essentially focuses on anomalies or major congestion events, and it scores each vendor based on the extent to which they captured the magnitude and duration of these slowdown events. And so this is something that over time has been used more often. It's not currently written into specifications, but it's proved to be a strong indicator of performance for operations purposes. So at the end of the first phase of the vehicle probe project, which recall only consisted of one vendor, there was increased interest in moving off of freeways and onto arterial facilities. The states who were purchasing probe data through this vehicle probe project wanted to know whether they could trust the data that was becoming available on arterial roads. So the coalition commissioned an arterial report study, and so the validation team did 13 separate data collections in 2013 and 2014 on different arterial road types, which had different characteristics, and then evaluated the data quality from a few different perspectives. One of the outcomes of this report is, this graphic that's at the bottom of the slide. And it's a really nice kind of summary of when you can trust data quality on arterials. The key factor here, the key takeaway, was that the data quality was most related to signal density on the road. So this provided a nice rule of thumb for agencies wanting to use probe data on arterials. You can look at how many traffic signals you have per mile and understand that if there aren't very many, the data is probably reliable. In a higher range, you should be cautious, and then very high signal density roads have quite complex characteristics and probably can't be trusted at this time. So this was the original report at the end of that only looked at the VPP1 data from a single vendor. But over time, in about 2018, the coalition realized that it was now about 4 years into the second phase of the project. The marketplace now consisted of 3 vendors, and we hadn't benchmarked the arterial data quality in a while. There were a number of discrete evaluations that had been done on arterials, but no effort had been made to summarize those results and provide a comparison with how the data looked in the past, the last time it was evaluated. So in order to help answer some of these questions, we produced a report that came out at the end of last year, which took the 14 arterial validation efforts, kind of the standard ones that are done on an ongoing basis between 2014 and 2018, and aggregated all the data that was, or all the error measures and all of the results of the traditional and slowdown analysis. Yes, aggregated all of that, broke it down in a number of different ways, and tried to gain some insight into how the data quality has changed over the last few years. So I don't have time to walk through all the detailed results and explain all the graphs. I'm happy to answer any questions afterwards if you want to talk more specific details. But here in the next few slides, I'm just going to walk through some of the findings. At a high level, all 3 vendors which provide data in VPP2 are much more compliant with the contract specifications, specifically related to the two error measures that I mentioned were part of the traditional analysis, and the specific values of these error measures reported over time, their average values are much lower now than they were in VPP1. And if you look carefully at these plots, which show the VPP1 results and also the results for each of the three vendors, these values are getting better, and also the differences between the vendors are quite small. So all three of them are performing better than the VPP1 data, which is an encouraging result. But that said, the traditional validation, while useful and something that should be considered, doesn't tell the entire story. The previous Arterial report found in particular that the slowdown analysis was much more robust on some of these complex roads. So when we look at the slowdown analysis for the VPP2 results, we found that the improvement was even more drastic. We had quite a large sample to work from. In VPP1, we had, actually in both cases, we had between 600 and 700 slowdowns to evaluate, and some high-level numbers just to communicate these trends are listed on the slide. So for example, in VPP1, the probe vendor was capturing about a third of the slowdowns, and now it's up to about 2/3, which is a drastic improvement. And perhaps more notably, this failure to capture slowdowns is particularly problematic. The distinction between fully and partially captured is probably less important than the problem posed by a vendor not capturing a slowdown event at all. In the first iteration, this was about a quarter of the time it was being completely missed, whereas now all the vendors are less than 10%, which is really encouraging. Finally, one of the key takeaways here is that unlike the first Arterial report, the road characteristics don't appear to be highly predictive of the data quality, at least within the range of road characteristics we were able to see in our case studies. So this doesn't allow you to produce a nice rule of thumb visual to give to agencies, but the good news is that the probe data is performing better on lower volume and higher signal density roads. So the high-level takeaways are that the data quality has improved quite a bit over time. All three vendors are more accurate now than what was being reported in the first phase of the project, and the data quality is suitable for many operational and most planning purposes, which is very good to see. And at least within the range of road conditions we saw, there's not this strong link between road characteristics, particularly signal density and data quality. There's still some existing challenges with probe data on arterials. One I just want to point out is kind of an obvious one, but if traffic flow is complex and there are multiple legitimate speed modes on the road, a probe data vendor that reports an average speed for each minute or each 5-minute period can't possibly, reporting just the average speed doesn't capture some of the complex dynamics. And then as we move forward, we're trying to get some data on lower volumes. This was something that we didn't have a lot of data in the very low volume range for this report, so we're hoping to push into that territory moving forward. We're also looking at how to refine some of the analysis techniques, particularly on really low volume roads, when you have to start looking for historical patterns as opposed to just data quality at a point in time, especially if you don't have enough data to characterize ground truth conditions at a particular highly granular period of time. And then finally, the last thing I want to mention is that this vehicle probe project is moving into its third phase next year. And while speed and travel time are going to remain one of the key products, there are also going to be some additional ones. And so the validation program is going to have to try to develop new methodologies to be able to capture some of these other data services that are provided through the marketplace and figure out how to validate them and provide a similar level of confidence in their performance. With that, I'll turn it back over.
Thank you very much. If anyone has questions for Zach, please do enter them in the question pod. I personally do have a couple of follow-on questions for Zach, so I'll go ahead and wait till our third presenter set is complete. Up next are Jason Decembre with Maryland Department of Transportation State Highway Administration and Ben Pichot with AEM Corporation, and they're going to talk about work recently completed comparing Waze and TMC data. Over to you, Jason.
Thanks, Charlie. Good afternoon, everyone, and I appreciate the opportunity to speak to everyone about a project we underwent. We talk a lot about crowdsourced data, and I don't think we talk enough about, the real day-to-day operational use of it. So what we wanted to do was really talk about some work AEM did with us to compare our TMC data that we enter through our ATMS system with the Waze data for our region. So just an overview of Maryland's TMC structure for those who may not be familiar with it. We operate 4 traffic management centers here in Maryland. 3 of those are regional centers, and then 1 is the 24-hour, 7-day-a-week statewide operations center. And really, those regional centers are responsible for dispatching our route patrols that respond to disabled motorist incidents, and then our statewide center is monitoring what I like to call the ripple effect. So picture a pebble dropping into a lake. The TOCs are worried about the spot where that pebble lands, and our statewide center is worried about the ripple effect of that particular incident. They all share the same ATMS, as well as our sister agency, the Maryland Transportation Authority, responsible for all toll roads. So the data is really comprehensive, encompasses all state highway and MDTA maintained roads. So it's obvious that crowdsourced data provides tremendous opportunities, but we really had to answer a few questions first before we really thought we could dig in. So this is just a look at some of the things that we track now, a lot of them related to EDC4 measures. So 114,000 events in 2019, that's just state highway alone. That's not including our sister agency at MDTA. Response time of 10 minutes, lane clearance time of 32 minutes, incident clearance time blank only because it's pretty closely aligned to the lane clearance time that we track there. But, that's over 300 events per day. So that's a lot. So what we needed to really figure out is what I like to call the Waze factor. So 114,000 events, plus we didn't know how many, would equal how much more work, how much more things to monitor. So what you're seeing here is a screenshot of our ATMS system, and the expectation, how we envisioned this working, similar to potential integration with police CAD systems, was that our operators would get an alert that an external system has created an incident along a route that we patrol or don't, and then the operator could then decide whether that event was relevant and whether we needed to also track that through our own ATMS system, and we could port over data and copy it. But our primary concern when we initially started this project was the overload of these Waze events and how much more that would be putting on the operators. So what I'll first do is hand over to Ben now to talk about the project and some of the outcomes that he uncovered, and then we'll talk about some of the reflection we did after getting the results. Ben?
Thank you, Jason. I hope you guys can hear me.
So the schedule, the timeline that we followed for that test is that we began archiving data around February 2020. And then we started snapping along the Maryland DOT linear referencing system the latitude and longitudes that are typically found in the Waze alerts and established preliminary statistics of the Waze events and on the frequency of events and pretty much how they were distributed among the typical Waze incident types, the Waze alert types that we're finding, which range from weather incidents to animal on the roadway to an actual accident. And in June 2020, we started doing intermediary finding, looking at changes in Waze alerts and trying to compare them with the TMC, with chart events, in particular the ones that would happen ahead of time. And pretty much this is some of the findings we had. So pretty much the map that you see is pretty much from January 27th to June 19th, 2020. And we have to bear in mind there that there's a lot of confinement that happened at that time, and the Waze reporting was seriously affected by this. So what we had is about 104,000 Waze data pools, which is about 8.3 million Waze updates, 1.9 million Waze events with different updates as they go in increasing confidence or decreasing confidence as they evolved. The focus on crashes were about 12,765 events, crashes for major crashes, 17,000 for minor crashes, about 23,500 that were unclassified. These are typically the ones that people record by using hand gesture on the phone rather than actually typing in. So these are typically not qualified by the Waze data source. And you can see on the map that this is covering a lot more than just the major roadways that chart is interested about, and a lot of them are actually on the rural section and in cities. So this is the chart that pretty much shows a stacked bar chart of different Waze subtypes. So the reds are and orange are accidents report, major and minor, and then the most reported Waze alerts that we found were pretty much car stopped on shoulder, car stopped on the road, and then object on the road, and then road kills and things like this. But what we can see is that starting March 15th, the data dropped considerably. And this actually kind of affected our ability to analyze that data a little bit. This was mostly due to people not going to work anymore and working from home and not reporting, except maybe for some freight drivers that were reporting what was going on. But we still had a little bit of data to be able to do the comparison. So the way we did the comparison and the way we attempted to do it was through what we would do was called a fuzzy match. Because there are, the way Waze alerts happen, they're always a little bit before, a little bit after, oops, sorry about that, a little bit before, a little bit after, both in time and along the roadway, where typically early reports of an incident will happen after the locations once the vehicle passes it. And later, I would say, events on the Waze timeline, once the incident is already established and congestion has started, usually appear before the incident itself, where people would report something that they've seen or from a distance. And so we tried to do a fuzzy match between the TMC and Waze data between the plus and minus 30-minute time window around the TMC time and a plus half a mile and minus half a mile based on the LRS location of the TMC event. And by comparing LRS to LRS with the Waze data type. And we focus specifically on accidents. So Waze refers to accidents and the chart data refers to TMCs. That's pretty much what we had. And we had about 2,951 TMC reported collisions that match, and 42,000 and about 500 Waze reports with many different matches. And there was also a lot of Waze events that were not directly related to TMC events because they were not on the type of roads that the chart manages. So these are just like per major roadway, I-95, I-695, pretty much the number of incidents and accidents that we have and the number of TMC collisions. So we can see that because of COVID, we have a significant drop in Waze reporting of accidents compared to what the TMC is using. But for the match, we can see that about out of the 102 Waze minor and major incidents that we have on I-95, for example, we were able to find 83 that match a TMC collision report, and the time difference was on average less than 8 minutes. So the Waze alerts started appearing 8 minutes before the TMC event was recorded. We also have looked at other Waze data than the accident reports, and sometimes they appear before, sometimes they appear after, because some of the earlier reports in Waze are often car on shoulder ahead or car stopped on the roadway before they actually become actual incidents, and they start getting a little bit more confidence and reliability on them. I'm going to go to the next slide. So the way we started analyzing this, and we did this for major roadways, and this is US 50, and so it's that we try to plot plus or minus 30 minutes. And what you see on the chart here in blue is pretty much 0 is the time of the TMC knowledge. On the records, these events, 0 is the time at which the TMC was aware of the incident. And in green, you have all the Waze alerts that were published on Waze before, up to 30 minutes before the TMC was aware of it on the roadway, up to half a mile before and after. And on red is pretty much the Waze events, the trailing alerts, what we call the previous one, the green one, we call them the leading alerts. The trailing alerts are the ones that are published after, in the 30 minutes after the roadway, after the TMC is aware of the incident. And you can see that there are Waze events that are being reported as much as 30 minutes ahead and 25 minutes ahead, which could be considerably, but the majority of them are usually 10 minutes before. Now, these are all Waze types of alerts. So you could have, animal on the road instead, which are quite irrelevant in this case. So what we did is we tried to continue to filter and switch to only collision. And pretty much this is an example of what we found for incidents and TMC collision incidents and Waze alerts. And we were able to identify Waze alerts appearing as soon as 25 minutes before the TMC was aware of it. And on average, what we saw was around minus 12 minutes, and then it continued increasing towards the time at which the TMC is aware of it, around minus 8, minus 4 minutes. So on average, minus 5 minutes is where, minus 5, minus 6 minutes is where we found, but minus 20 minutes is the early notifications. And granted, at that time, usually there is a Waze alert that is referring to an accident. The confidence is very poor. It's on the lowest setting, and it has to be monitored quickly. And it could vanish. It happens. But it could sometimes be very significant and develop. So the next thing that we're going to be trying to maybe look at is the slope at which the confidence and the reliability that Waze is providing is increasing, to see if there's a pattern there that could help, I would say, identify it. This early 25 minutes ahead of time, Waze alerts needs to be focused on, or if it's something that is likely to disappear, which is always kind of tricky to find. And I'm going to pass it back to Jason. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Ben. So prior to Ben's work, really the only use, I'll say, of crowdsourced data that we were using in Maryland anyway was, I'll call it reactionary. We used it to calculate Q inside of our ATMS events. It obviously was feeding our overhead message signs and travel time messaging for many, many years. And then through the Waze CCP, we've recently started looking at the Waze traffic view tool, where you can see the comparative, I'll say, delay and routing. But we really thought we could do better with this data set to find a way to improve the customer experience. So we thought the use of it in the TMC world is to really improve the incident detection, and then as a second piece, improve verification. So first, let's talk about verification for a minute. So, if I'm at one of my operations centers and I get 10 phone calls within 5 minutes about the same problem within the same general area, I'm going to consider that a pretty reliable source that it's really there. Some of the details might be different. Maybe it's not in the first lane, it's in lane 2, but there's something going on there. Should we really be treating Waze data any different when it has 10 likes within 5 minutes? My instinct says no. It's the same difference. So Waze data can be a force multiplier, for our TMCs, and we can compress some of these actions all in an effort to start resources to the scene sooner. The other thing is for detection, and Ben kind of alluded to this, harken back to my previous slide where I said that our response time was around 10 minutes. Well, okay, so a majority of these are within 5 minutes. So I'm getting someone to the scene usually within 5 minutes of Waze indicating that the incident's there. But there's those subsets that are on the outlying, fringes of 20 minutes, and some routes even longer. So can we use Waze to detect things, more quickly? And really, why does that matter? Well, our entire goal should really be to compress this incident timeline. And we did a lot of work through EDC4 of establishing, some benchmarks and some goals of reducing lane clearance time and reducing incident clearance time, secondary crashes. How do we improve response time? But from a TMC standpoint, I think we're missing some potential to really shrink that time between detection and verification, because the sooner you detect it, the sooner you verify it, the sooner resources get there, and it's just that, again, that ripple effect that really cycles through to get lanes open and make the roadway safer. So what you might be thinking is, okay, that's great, but you only had, in that example of US 50 that Ben showed, you really only had 2 or 3 events that were of note, of longer than that 5-minute, 10-minute window that you're targeting. Is it really worth that investment? Well, I think what we can't lose sight of is, yes, while in traffic incident management and in TMCs, we're trying to reduce the non-recurring congestion, there's a more important goal, and that really is to save lives. So 2 examples that have happened just recently, within the last several weeks. There was a fatal collision on Route 95 near exit 43, Maryland 100, and in this particular case, it was a disabled vehicle that became disabled. The motorist got out of their vehicle to check on what they thought was wrong and was struck and killed. There was another accident, similar situation. Vehicle broke down in the lane, and it was struck by another tractor-trailer, which then resulted in a fatality. What I couldn't help but wonder is, what if? What if somehow, through this crowdsourced data, we were able to detect these incidents sooner, especially, recall, 10-minute response time. So let's just pretend, and I understand that in these times we could make an argument that there might not be many Waze users traveling at those times a day, but what if there were? And what if our TMC had been notified of that incident 20 minutes sooner? It's possible that it wouldn't have been reported in Waze, but what if it had been? So the what ifs are worth the investment to us to save a life. So we're only talking about the data that Ben showed on routes that we patrol so far in chart, but what about for the roads that we don't? So we believe that Waze data can also help detect incidents for secondary roads that we might not be readily responding to. Can we be more informed to figure out if we need to send patrols there, or leading to the second point of, can we identify gaps in where we have ITS devices lacking? Should there be a section of road where we should put a camera or a detector or some type of infrastructure to better detect these incidents? And then lastly, closely aligned, where should we be putting patrol trucks? Is there a secondary route that we notice there's extra volume, and maybe we can't staff it 24/7, but we could divert resources during primary peak travel times? So with that, we'll be happy to take any questions after Vishali takes over and leads us to the next part here.
Thank you very much, Jason and Ben. So Nilu, can we go ahead and at this point open it up to the Q&A, and we'll go ahead and add some of the questions that have already been asked. So let's go ahead and start with a question at the very beginning regarding the TOLLWAY project, the costs that you shared in terms of the 3 options, are they only for the pilot effort, or is it for more continued investment?
That's just for the Central Tri-State, and actually I want to caution about using that cost too, that the microwave looked particularly bad there because with 12 plus lanes and a concrete barrier in the middle, we required for our analysis 2 microwave sensors every half mile, 1 for each direction. If you're going to a 6-lane section of road, or 6 lanes both direction, you could probably get by in 1 side fire microwave. So those costs were up. Also, where the methodology we used to determine where the hotspots were, there were 4 hotspots identified on the Central Tri-State. When we applied that same methodology to the rest of the system, I think we only found 2 others. So the capital costs and some of the maintenance costs for the third-party data and the Bluetooth would actually be lower. So that cost is just for the Central Tri-State, and I would not recommend using that as a rule of thumb anywhere else in the world.
Thank you. We had 1 or 2 other questions. So specifically based on the review of the 3 vendors, was there a consistent difference between data, or was there a higher or lower sensitivity of one of the vendors compared to others?
Yeah, there's definitely a difference in them, and I think you saw that on some of the first charts, that some of the vendors tended to report slightly higher speeds, slightly lower travel times than the other vendors, but it was fairly consistent across them. And we did look at things in a lot of detail at individual spots and more grandly at the whole system. And the sensitivity we didn't really see. There's certainly some more variability from one to the next. We also looked at things like, and I did not mention it, but the time constraints. We looked at 20 incidents to compare how each one would track their speeds through those incidents. We had people sit at the traffic control center and just monitor the screen and look at traffic, and they could look on a map in TIMS at all 6 sources, the 3 existing and the 3 vendors, and compare them up against each other to see how they work. But that was much more anecdotal than the overall, the larger statistics that we looked at.
Thank you. And
again,
finally,
I'm sorry, just again, the bottom line is I think all 3 did fairly well.
very good to know. And finally, when do you anticipate the report be publicly available, or will it be publicly available?
I'll answer that question is probably way above both Elise and mine pay grade. And typically the TOLLWAY doesn't generally publish reports unless they're submitting for TRB or something like that. If there's papers for conferences, it'll be in there. But speaking for the TOLLWAY and Elise, you can tell me if I'm wrong. I think the TOLLWAY is certainly more than willing to talk to any other agency about the results.
Great. Thank you. All right. So we had a question for, let's see, Ed Mark has a question about, are there differences, and what is the basis for the difference in output from the first phase and the second phase of the Vehicle Probe project from the 2008 to 2014 for data generated by INRIX? What contributed to the changes in data quality, I guess, is the question. Zach?
Yeah, that's a good question. That's referring to the fact that INRIX was the sole provider in the first iteration of the project, and then they were also one of the vendors in the second phase as well. You know, as the validation team, we're not privy to the internal details of how they generate the speed and travel time values that they report. So I can't give specifics on why that changed. It's possible there was a change in if there was a change in their product, it's possible it was due to differences in data processing, differences in data sources that they use to generate the values, and also I should point out that as we go to different locations and do validations, on different roadways in different states. Each time is a unique sample, and it's very unlikely that the data quality would be exactly the same in two different locations and two different times of the year, from a different sample. So there are going to be some natural differences as we go from location to location.
Thank you. Do you have, Zach, any thoughts or ideas for agencies that are considering using arterial vehicle probe data? Are there simple strategies or processes they can use to validate the data, potentially not necessarily as robust as through the VPP effort? You mentioned that there are some new mechanisms you're looking at in terms of assessing data quality. Provide any thoughts on that?
Yeah, so most of the things we're looking at do require another reference travel time data set. So I think that's the key thing to try to acquire if you're an agency trying to look at it. It doesn't necessarily need to be an incredibly in-depth analysis, but I do want to point out that the speed values reported in VPP are explicitly space mean speeds, so they correspond to average travel times of traffic. So that's something to be aware of if you go out and set out some sensor that measures speed at a specific point. That doesn't necessarily correspond to the average travel time or average space mean speed over a distance. So that's something to keep in mind. But what I've found is sometimes within a state there are already agencies that have Bluetooth sensors permanently installed, maybe just along a single corridor, but often they're willing to donate data. So I don't know, I think tollways often have, I don't know if they share the results from matched toll tags, but finding a reference travel time data set is key for comparison, even if it's just getting some people to go in a car and do floating car runs. It's not ideal, but you can at least do some sanity checking. If you don't have another data source, some ideas could include looking up the times of known incidents that are logged and going onto that road segment and seeing if there's a drop in speed at that time to sanity check whether that event was captured in the data feed. You could also take known speed limits and see whether, I don't know, the 85th percentile of speeds observed at night or something along those lines match the known speed limits to sanity check whether it's right. So I guess there are some kind of ad hoc ways that you can at least sanity check the data, but the best thing would be to get a reference travel time data set for direct comparison.
Thank you. And we have a question on the WAYS project. Is there analysis of the WAYS reported incidents on road segments instrumented as opposed to non-instrumented road segments?
This is Jason. Not that I'm aware of, at least I can tell you we didn't look at that for Maryland in this particular case. Ben kind of alluded to it. Our next step is to kind of look at arterials versus our primary routes and what the difference is. And for the most part, at least, again, speaking from Maryland, that would somewhat do it in the sense that our primary patrol routes are instrumented versus our arterials are not really. But it's not directly correlated to that particular ask, the instrumented versus not.
Right. I would say we collected the data for the entire state, and we tried to do the LRS transcription for the entire set of events, so the few millions we had. So whatever other data we can compare it to that can come in the future, we can perform that analysis. But in that case, we haven't done it yet.
All right. Do we have any other questions? Otherwise, we have one or two closing slides, I believe, Nilu. Can you bring them back up from James's presentation? Okay. This is, as James noted, the 8th installment of the Adventures in Crowdsourcing series. The next one will be in September. I believe it's September 15th, and we're going to focus on automating and enhancing traveler information services through crowdsourced data. You can Google it or click on the link below. And then the October is going to be a unique webinar in that we're going to have a rapid fire session with successes over the 2-year everyday counts crowdsourcing for operations period that focus on, improving geographic coverage, improving the timeliness of information, and we're going to try to cover all of the different types of applications of crowdsourced data. And that will be somewhere in the 3rd week of October, so stay tuned for that. And with that, we will close. James Collier is the lead for this innovation, so if you have any thoughts on how to improve this series, what you liked, what you think you'd like to see more of, please do reach out to James. And as just a footnote, the work that was done with Maryland Department of Transportation through AEM Corporation was actually through the Adventures in Crowdsourcing program. And to remind you that the program, while we do things like the webinar and workshops and peer exchanges, the program is available to provide technical assistance to help bridge the gap, whether it's a technical policy or a process gap. So if your agency needs support, please do reach out to James Collier for that as well. And so with that, I want to thank all of our presenters today. You guys did an amazing job, and actually have many more questions for each of you that I will follow up on. So you guys are free to roam the building, and I'll hand it over to Nilu. Thank you very much for sponsoring this platform.
Thank you, everyone. And as a reminder, the recording of the meeting along with the presentations will be available on NOCO website within 48 hours. That's all. Have a great rest of your day.